everybody, to FCTV's new studio here at 310 Dillingham Avenue. My name is Jeff Wyman. I'm the Government Access Coordinator for Falmouth Community Television. We are here today with Representative Dylan Fernandes. Dylan, welcome to your first show here in our new studio. How's
Gorgeous. It looks beautiful. Well, you know, I was here on opening day, Jeff.
Yeah,
so,
I see you there.
You know, I came out, awesome community showing here, a lot of people here to support. And you know, you guys, it looks like you've done a good job keeping the place looking good since then. So it's an incredible studio. I recommend anyone from Falmouth who hasn't been here to come down. It's really a great community asset.
Yeah, it was a long time coming, but we're pretty proud of it.
No kidding, you should be.
So appreciate the accolade. So we're going to be talking about a few things today, a handful of things, all from education to environmental concerns and a little bit of technology as well. So let's jump right into it. You were telling me before the show there's this giant education bill up right now.
Yeah, so this is, well, let me take this back a little bit. So Massachusetts, actually enshrined in its constitution, has a section about the Massachusetts legislature supporting our public and educational system. And so that's actually a unique thing to have in our own constitution, where the right to education is actually baked into it. And so, you know, part of the language in it is that we need to support education and that we need to cherish public education, because at the end of the day, in a democratic society, education is the best tool we have to expand opportunity to people and to lift people out of poverty. And so at Massachusetts, we have some of the top educational outcomes in the country. In fact, we have the top educational outcomes in the country, and we're competitive with a lot of foreign nations worldwide, especially in math and science. And so we've really made education one of our most important issues in Massachusetts. But over the past couple decades, we have been underfunding our educational system. And so in the 1990s, Massachusetts passed this revolutionary education reform law that led to these incredible outcomes that we've had. But since then, a lot has changed in our system. And so, in the 1990s, the technology is a heck of a lot different. You know, the different costs associated with schools is a lot different, especially ballooning healthcare costs, right, that have been unaccounted for in the original bill. And then how we educate our students and the cost of educating students has changed a lot too in the past 30 years. So particularly, we knew this was happening, and then in order to find exactly how we're going to change it, the state commissioned a foundation budget review commission to take a look at you know, how we're underfunding our educational system, what we're doing well, what's underperforming, what fixes we need to make to our funding formula. And they found that we've been chronically underfunding our education system to the tune of about $1.5 billion because we're not properly funding things like low-income students. We're not properly reimbursing districts for the number of low-income students that can be a real challenge to educate. We're not properly reimbursing for English language learners, people who come into school speaking English as a second language, and back at home they're speaking a foreign language. That's more costly in terms of education dollars. We hadn't been allocating enough money for that. And then also around special needs students, a population that is a little more costly to educate as well. And so the formula needed to be changed. And so we did that just on Wednesday, actually, and we passed this generational $1.5 billion investment into our educational system. And so now we will be properly funding our public schools for generations to come. We were there very late. We got in, the session started at 1. We didn't get out of the building until I think 10 or 11. Really massive piece of legislation, but one that was voted on unanimously. Every single member, both Republican and Democratic, supported the bill, voted for it. And because at the end of the day, Massachusetts, one of our tenets as a state, one of the reasons why our economy is performing so well here, and just kind of who we are as a people. Like, we deeply value investing in each other, and in particularly investing in our children's education. So this was probably one of the biggest bills I've ever taken up. It's certainly the biggest education bill that's been done since the early 1990s, and a huge step forward for Massachusetts, and a huge deal for future generations of students in our state.
Wow. Did you talk about the funding for this? Like, is there going to be any other part of the state economy that's going to suffer because of $1.5 billion?
A lot of money.
An awful lot. So
yeah, no kidding.
How are we getting that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, our economy is really overperforming projections, and so in the near term, we've been getting in a lot more state dollars than what was originally projected, and so based on that revenue, in the near term, we'll be able to fund this increase in tax dollars. And so it's $1.5 billion over the next 10 years, to be clear. It's not $1.5 billion a year, right? And then also on top, so in the near term, we have the money right now to fund it. And then in terms of long-term revenue for this, one of the things that we passed this session, we're going to have to pass next session, and then the voters are also going to have to pass it, is the Millionaire's tax, and that's a 5% increase on income of people who make over $1 million a year. That's projected to raise somewhere between $1 to $2 billion in new tax revenue, and so that aligns kind of perfectly with this educational piece. And so that's in the long term. That's one of the places where this money will come from. Probably the main place, because in the actual Millionaire's tax legislation that we've taken up, the money says, okay, we're gonna raise that 4%. On income over $1 million, and that money has to go to either infrastructure or education. It can only go to those two places, and so I see that being a major contributor.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's excellent news, and it's great to hear the economy is overperforming projections.
I know, it's good. It's good. I know, it's good stuff. But Massachusetts, we're still going to be looking at a revenue package this year as well, because, you know, we have a flat income tax rate in Massachusetts. Everyone pays the same income tax, and that is how we get most of our tax dollars. You get them through other things as well, you know, meals tax, room tax, corporate tax, right? But when you look at the Massachusetts tax system, in comparison to the rest of the nation, we're actually at the back half of states who tax a lot. You know, the term Taxachusetts came out of like the 1970s, right? It's a long time ago, and Massachusetts was a really highly taxed state. Now we're not even close to the top 10. We're in the back half, and so we're taking a look at, and there's a lot of programs like education, right? We want to make a generational investment in education. We have issues of, you know, how the heck are we going to deal with climate change, right? And resiliency, that's going to cost our state billions of dollars, right? And then we have a number of issues that we want to fund, especially around healthcare. You know, Massachusetts has the highest rate of people enrolled in healthcare in the nation, which is something that we should be really proud about, but that also costs a lot of money, right? And so how do we raise revenue for these? How do we pay for these things that we know people in Massachusetts value, and continue to support those causes that people really care about? Well, we're going to have to raise some revenue. And so there's also a discussion there around a potential of a gas tax, which hasn't been raised in years and is well below the average. There's a talk about congestion pricing. There's talks about putting taxes on Lyfts and Ubers. And a couple other pieces as well, because one of the things that's really failing our state is our transportation system, and that requires a big investment. And then how do we pay for that in an equitable way and in a way that moves Massachusetts towards having a better transportation and also a cleaner transportation in terms of reducing less carbon emissions?
Absolutely, all about climate change.
Yeah.
Prepare for that, and that's something that's near and dear to your heart too. I understand you do a lot of work up in Beacon Hill. So you mentioned, speaking of climate change and in the environment, GreenWorks is a program that you're working with.
Yeah, so this is legislation that we passed right before August, and it's a big investment in. And the money goes, the way it's structured is the money flows through local municipalities. So it flows through local cities and towns for them to both combat climate change in terms of making their communities more resilient, but also reduce their carbon footprint. So it's not just about adapting to climate change. It's also about reducing carbon and mitigating how we're impacting climate change. And so there's two pieces to this. It's a bill that will infuse a lot of money to cities and towns and enable them to electrify their vehicle fleet. So there'll be grants available for that. It'll allow municipalities to join on to microgrids to make their energy use a lot more efficient. And so that's kind of on the reducing greenhouse gas emissions piece. And then there's also a significant fund there for municipalities to kind of adapt, right, and kind of like shore up areas that are going to be really vulnerable to climate change that are still salvageable. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much hardening we do on our coast, there's going to be a lot of places around our coast that are just going to be gone, no matter how much money you spend. And so you're going to see a lot of that in Falmouth, right? You're going to see a lot of that in across my district, across the Cape and Islands, and so this legislation builds on legislation we passed last year about municipal vulnerability plans. So we gave grants to municipalities across the state. Falmouth took advantage of one about looking for towns to look at all of their town-wide assets and to look at the town coastline and make an assessment on which areas we need to absolutely save and which areas that no matter what, based on projections, aren't going to be here. Which assets do the communities have that they need to move away from the shoreline and to a higher area to make sure that they're protected. And so this also builds on that legislation. But we got a lot more we need to do around climate change, certainly, but this is a good piece of the puzzle and something that will certainly help.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Falmouth has, about 15 miles of coastline?
Yeah, I hear more coastline than any other community in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So how is that funding distributed? Is Falmouth, because of our vulnerability in particular, do we get a little bit more of a slice of that pie?
Yeah, so it is, so it's funded through grants, right? And so the Senate the Senate hasn't taken up the legislation yet, but we expect them to take it up pretty soon. And then the governor still needs to sign it into law. But once it becomes law, it would be a grant program run by the administration, most likely. And this is subject to tweaks and whatnot. And the legislative process is one that is very iterative. But yeah, it'll it's the way it's structured now is as a grant program for municipalities to apply for.
Right, so just grab it if you want, basically.
Yeah, and I think they will.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Knowing the folks and their hard work of the water quality management community here, they are going to go after that, I'm positive. So continuing with restoration and coastal resiliency along that line, you were mentioning Shiverick's Pond before we started. Yeah,
well, folks reached out to me about Shiverick's Pond a couple months ago, and I was talking to the town manager about it, Paul Dreyer, a few other folks in town, and they're looking at making a park in the heart of Falmouth around Shiverick's Pond. And there really is no, there's a couple, there's some green space in downtown Falmouth for people to walk around and picnic at, right? But when you think of downtown Falmouth, you don't think of like a park area, especially around a pond, right? And so Shiverick's Pond is a beautiful pond right downtown, right behind Main Street. And it's really kind of an underutilized, underappreciated beautiful natural landscape in Falmouth. And so there's been a working group in town that's working really hard to say, okay, how can we share this beautiful place with the public? And they're working on a plan that they've been putting together around making a walkway around the pond, maybe making a dock for people to go out to on the pond. There's talk about doing, making sure that there's a path around it on the roadside too, because right now I think there's no a sidewalk at all, and so you have to I think there's just like road and then like barrier and then pond. So there's talk about making a sidewalk around it for people to enjoy. It sounds like a great idea, and it'd be really awesome to have a beautiful pond park right in the heart of downtown Falmouth. Of course, this takes money, and so we put in and got in the supplemental budget 2 weeks ago, $50,000 that the state's going to pitch in for this park. I don't think the group has come up with a final dollar figure yet, and I think they're working on it. I think they have a ballpark, but this will just be additional money from the state, and something that I just put in as a budget amendment to get for the town.
It's really nice living in a place and a community that appreciates open space like that and a beautiful landscape. Because on Monday, the 28th, phase 2 of the Coonamessett River Restoration Project is taking ground.
I'll be there.
You will be there, I'm sure. So I just want to congratulate the people in that project, and especially Betsy Gladfelder for spearheading that, getting all the funding for it.
Betsy's a dynamo. Betsy's a total dynamo, and has really pulled together so many. That's a really cool thing about the Coonamessett River Restoration Project. There's a lot of cool things, right? But one is that Betsy has been able to pull together, I don't even know what the number is, but like a couple dozen organizations, right? Like a huge amount of organizations from all over town, including the state, including federal and local. And it's really, it's just really cool to see how when all of these groups work together, they can create an amazing project right in Falmouth that restores this incredible landscape. And people who haven't been there yet should go check it out. Because at the beginning, admittedly, it looked kind of ugly, right? As it was getting kind of reformatted. But now it's stunningly beautiful, and the wildlife that has returned is just really fun to watch. But one of those really, one of those feel-good stories that doesn't come by accident, comes from a ton of hard work on the local level, and that's just a tribute to Betsy and all the other people who pitched in along the way.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of people to appreciate with that. So switching gears a little bit from environmental things to some technology. Exciting things happening downtown Falmouth with Open Cape, yes?
Yeah. So I met with, it was a while ago, maybe a year and a half ago, met with at the Falmouth Chamber with members of the Chamber. I believe the EDIC was there, someone from the town was there, and they talked about, okay, how do we get high-speed internet in Falmouth, given that Comcast during a summer rush failed and was out for an extended period of time, and local businesses on Main Street were really struggling to get online sales or get electronic sales because Comcast went down. And Comcast has a complete monopoly, right, over us on the Cape, because they're basically the game in town in terms of a private supplier. But Open Cape, which was funded out of the U.S. Recovery Act, right? Part of what came out of the financial crisis. Open Cape, which stretches across the Cape and is also on the islands too, is is this incredibly high-speed internet that's right here that we should be able to tap into, and a lot of entities have, right? Like our municipalities have, the Woods Hole, the institutions, the science institutions down at Woods Hole have tapped into it, and so a lot of the largest businesses on the Cape have tapped into it, and now the second phase of that is, okay, how do we get this into kind of smaller scale businesses, and how do we get this into residential areas and drive some competition for Comcast, and hopefully drive down prices for everyone and raise the amount of high-speed internet available to everyone. So in an economic bond bill, I put in a $200,000 appropriation, a bond appropriation for EDI, the Falmouth EDIC, for Open Cape internet service, and then the House and Senate, and Vinny in the Senate side got in a $100,000 direct appropriation to EDIC. For Open Cape in downtown Falmouth, and so the result of that has been, Vinny and I just put in the money. The result of that has been like incredible work on the ground by the EDIC, by Open Cape, and others to jumpstart this business, where now all the local businesses along Main Street can sign up for Open Cape wireless internet service. And this is something that's actually pretty affordable, pretty cheap. It's the highest speed internet in the basically in the world that you can get, and I think a lot of local businesses are signing up to take advantage of it. And the price is very competitive with the price at Comcast. So I encourage, if you're on Main Street, go to opencape.com, sign up. It's open right now for people to enroll. And a lot of, this is a tribute to, Vinny and I just helped jumpstart the funding. A lot of this work on the ground has been by the EDIC, the Chamber, and Open Cape, who've been doing some really great work on it.
Can't wait. Definitely take advantage of it.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So that's a direct correlation with the strength of the economy here in Falmouth on Main Street, and with a stronger economy comes more jobs and workers. Mm-hmm. And you were talking a little bit before the show started, pardon me, a bill that you were working on about workers' rights. And it was a victory for the Democrats because there was a veto of the governor. Yeah, so veto the governor. So this was,
so basically in 2018, in the Janus decision by the Supreme Court rolled back unions' rights, and so forever and rolled back the way that unions could collect collective bargaining fees. And so in Massachusetts, and there's been a concerted attack nationwide on public sector, on unions, both by largely Republicans in Congress and also by our federal courts. And I think it's worth reminding, we have right now in Massachusetts some of the highest income inequality in the nation, and our nation has some of the highest income inequality. And the income inequality here is at the height that it was in the 1920s right now. I mean, it's just, the wealth gap is incredibly profound. And so, we need really strong worker organizations. We need really strong unions to help rebuild our middle class that has been eroding for decades and decades as wages have become stagnant, the cost of services have gone up, and a lot of people are really struggling to get by. So this legislation that we passed was directly tied to this Janus decision, to try and insulate unions here in Massachusetts from that decision. We passed that actually, 6 months ago. And it passed with a lot of Republican support, by the way, in the House, but the governor vetoed it. And so we just a couple weeks ago overrode his veto, and so now it's become law despite the governor's opposition to it.
With the help of the same Republicans?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, so Massachusetts has, so there's 160 reps, right? But only I think 35 Republicans, and so you need a 2/3 majority to override a veto by the governor. And we have way more than a 2/3 majority, right? Like there's a massive majority of Democrats, and so that happens pretty regularly, not all the time, but often that the governor will reject our proposal that will pass, and then we'll just go back and override his veto. It happens a lot in the budget process, actually, but this was another example of that. And a lot of my Republican colleagues in the House, too, also voted to override the governor's veto of it. And so, I don't think, in Massachusetts, there's a fair amount of working across the aisle, and just because you're, a Republican doesn't mean you won't vote against Charlie Baker. Sometimes, usually you'll be with them, right? Most of the time, but sometimes you won't be. And same with the Democrats in the House. Like we're usually in agreement with the majority of our Democratic colleagues, but sometimes we're not. And like I've voted against, I've voted with Republicans before on legislation. I've voted against my own party before, and so I vote most of the time with my party, but just because I'm a Democrat doesn't mean I vote lockstep with my party. At the end of the day, I care about what the people of Falmouth care about and the people on Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, and that's who I represent.
That's why they vote for you.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
When is your next, are you coming up an election this next time in 2020?
Yeah, 2020, every 2 years. Yeah. That's great, I love running for election every 2 years. Yeah.
Well, it's an expensive process. Well, that's all we've got here for you today. We appreciate you coming in and updating us on these several issues, and you're always welcome back whenever you want, but if I don't hear from you, I will definitely contact you in another few months.
Sounds great, Jeff. Love being on.
All right, great. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. We will talk to you soon here again with another legislative update in a few months with Representative Dylan Fernandes. Thanks for joining us.